one of the questions I always ask a person when they come to the studio is I ask them, what do you see? And they look at the hand, and it's like 99.9% of the people that come to the studio, they say, I see a hand. I'm like, okay, we're going to have to change that. I was born in Montevideo, Uruguay, South America. My parents were Italian immigrants. And I stayed in Uruguay until the age of 5. At the age of 5, my parents decided to migrate to the United States, where at the beginning it wasn't very easy. But before leaving Uruguay, there's an interesting part to this story, is that I was born across the street from the art studio of a Uruguayan artist. In the studio, he had an academy where he taught. The day we were leaving to the United States, we left to the United States because my parents wanted to seek new frontiers. And when we were leaving, before getting into the car to go to the airport, I picked up a drawing, and this drawing that I picked up was the face of a man who was dreaming, and in that dream there was a limousine, there was a beautiful woman, there was a lot of money, and all that was within this cloud in a dream. And I looked at the paper and I said, wow, I would really love to do this. I would really love to draw this way. And it was like a going away gift from life. That drawing stood with me until I started college. I lost track of it. Those things that you don't give that much importance. You keep, as a child you keep it, but as you grow up, and then it just disappeared. But it was enough to say, you have to go this way. Well, we used to live in an apartment complex, and it was like a melting pot of all cultures, people from different nationalities. We had within our crew there were kids who were really great at sports, others in literature, others in music, and I was the one who always drew and drew and drew. But when I started school, my first year, it was very difficult because I came from a country which I spoke Spanish. And I was in this classroom. I did not understand the language. I didn't know how to communicate in this language, this new language. And I had to use my drawing to basically tell the other people, both teacher and students, what was going through my mind. And drawing from the beginning, I think it all started in first grade. In first grade is when I started to use this drawing, and I remember when I was alone in my solitude, I would go to this drawing that I picked up before leaving my country, and I would look at it, and I would draw it, and redraw it, and redraw it, and never would be the same. I mean, I was a child. I would never be the same as something that an adult would draw. But art was my way of communicating to my teacher, to my friends, to my students, my fellow students. Drawing was and is the most important way of communication in my life. I think I was about 10 years old. Not sure if it was between 9 and 11. Dad shows up one day from work, and he had this possibility of getting a loan, and we could actually have our first home. We moved into this beautiful little house, 3 bedroom home, with a backyard, and we constructed a shed with that, and it was really beautiful. And one of the interesting things was that Dad worked at the Venezuelan embassy, and while working at the Venezuelan embassy, he met a friend, of which this friend, he gave him the basement, so he could live in our basement. I thought he would be paying rent, but he didn't pay rent. He was there as a friend. And as a way of saying thank you to my parents for letting him stay the time that he stayed, he would see that I loved to draw. And he took me, I remember I think it was the head company, and we went to the art department, and he says, I want you to choose whatever here you like. And I was like, whoa, I can't make this guy waste money, it's. And he says, I want you to buy things that'll help you start your career. I was about 10, 11, and I couldn't choose anything. I mean, I was really shy. So he grabbed this box, and in the box there were oils, and there were brushes, and turpentine, and linseed oil, and a palette. I'm like, that's too much money. He says, this is what you deserve. So he bought that. He bought a sketchbook, and he bought pencils. When I got home, I kind of like felt guilty, and I told Dad, and Dad said, look, he wanted to do this, so we have to accept it. It's his way of saying thank you for all we've done for him. The next day, that was on a Friday, I think it was, next day on a Saturday, I went to the backyard and I did everything a future artist should not do. Grabbed 4 pieces of wood, made a wooden frame, grabbed some sheets. That part was kind of complicated because I had to explain to my mother later that those sheets, I needed them for the great work of art I was going to do, when in reality the sheets were part of the bed. And I stretched the sheets with nails, also something that you shouldn't do. It wasn't very stretched. And I started painting with a canvas or sheets that were not primed, so the oil will go through the other side. And I was like painting, trying to see if anybody would see that I was painting, because I wanted the world to see that I was an artist. And in my backyard there was this man cutting, Mr. Conroy. He was cutting his lawn, and all of a sudden I hear that he stops his machine. I'm like, wow, this guy appreciates art. And I turned around, I looked behind me, and there he was watching me paint. He goes, calls me, and I said, okay, I'm going to sell my first painting. And he says, what are you doing? And I was like, this guy must be idiot. I mean, he doesn't understand what I'm doing. I'm painting, I didn't say that. I remember I felt it inside. That I do remember. So I looked at him, I said, I'm an artist. I'm painting a work of art. Now, you have to realize there's this little kid, 9, 10, 11 years old, telling an adult that he already has a profession. I mean, it was really impressive to see this man not laugh. She says, can you just keep that thought for a second? I'll be right back. So he ran into his house, got back, and he brought a sketchbook with pencils, and behind his hand he had something. And he said, can you draw me an egg? I'm like, wow, this guy has a sketchbook and he has good pencils. It wasn't that number 2 pencil that we used in school, yellow with the red. No, these were drawing pencils. So I'm like, okay. So I drew an egg, and I drew the egg. The egg was so big, it was an ostrich egg. So he grabs the egg from behind his hand. But he had his hand in behind his back, brings the egg and puts it on top of my egg. I'm like, okay, he's putting an egg on top of my ostrich egg, which my ostrich egg should be a hen egg, and it's not a hen egg. This guy is trying to tell me something. So I looked at him and I said, so? He says, it's a beautiful egg. They're both beautiful eggs. But your egg is not the real egg. I'm like, I didn't understand the concept he was giving me. But he was actually teaching me. I'm like, okay. He says, ask your parents if you can come over to my house. So I talked to my mom and I said, look, Mom, neighbor behind asked me if I could go and see some stuff. She says, okay, don't come late and be very respectful. I mean, here we are with an Italian mom who respect is first. Both mom and dad, if you didn't respect somebody, boom. Go into his house and I start looking all over and I'm like, oh my God, there are paintings all over the place. I mean, this guy had paintings all over the wall. I'm like, these are nice paintings. It was like a museum. Who painted all this? He says, I painted them. You paint? He says, yeah, I paint. I teach at Catholic University in D.C. You teach in a university. I was 10 years old, but I knew that university was an important thing. I mean, we didn't have internet back then, and we didn't talk about, when you're 10 years old, you don't talk about college, you talk about school. College is too far off. So I look at him, I'm like, okay, that's good. He says, I want to show you my studio. So we go into the studio, which is that beautiful studio that any artist wants to have. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's an artist for real. And I looked at his palette, and it was the Masters Palette. I'm like, oh my God, this guy is for real. I looked at him, and I'm like, okay, so I'm not an artist really after all. I mean, I gave him that look, and he looked at me with a smile, and he says, would you be so kind of to give me your drawing as a gift? I'm like, you want my drawing? He says, yeah, I want your drawing. I said, okay, give you my drawing. You're going to hang it up with all these beautiful paintings? And he's like, this is a beautiful drawing, he says. You know why it's beautiful? I said, no, I have no idea. It's just an egg. He says, this is a beautiful drawing because it's authentic. It's done by you. It's not a copy. It came from your mind. I'm like, wow. He made that drawing seem like something like the Guernica, you know, the Mona Lisa. I'm like, oh my God. He says, I'm going to give you a gift. You give me a gift, I give you a gift. So he goes to the studio, he grabs 3 tubes of paint, and he puts them in a box, and he gives me red, yellow, and blue. He says, this is for you. What's this? He says, you have to promise, Scout's honor, that you will not use this until you're ready. You have to know what red, yellow, and blue are, how they work, and understand color before you use it. You got to promise me. I said, sure, I promise you. I'm Scout's honor here. And I put tubes away, and I didn't use them until 14 or 15 years later when they really came to use. A week later, or 10, 12 days later, I would look in the backyard to see if I would see him, but he would never come out. I mean, his grass was getting bigger, and he wasn't cutting his grass. So I decided one day, knock on his door. Rang the bell, and his wife said, look, my husband passed away. I was a child, didn't understand what losing someone was. So I tried to ask her if he left me a note, and she just looked at me and she said, my husband passed away. He's no longer with us. Please let me be in peace. And that was it. I mean, he gave me the message he had to give me during the time we met. We met once, and I actually saw my first Masters Palet. had a really deep conversation with my dad and my mom, and I was about almost 11, 12, and I told them, I said, look, I want to become an artist. And I said to myself, I mean, I had it very clear what I wanted, but I wasn't sure if my parents had it very clear. And much to my surprise, both my mom and dad understood me. They understood the necessity to become an artist. The thing is, Dad, he worked all day, and he was like, and we were really tight economically. And he said, okay, you want to become an artist. How do you plan on paying for your education? You're 11. I said, Dad, don't worry. I said, I want to be an artist. That's my responsibility. I just need both your okays. Because, I mean, this starts. I was going to end up being an artist all the way. Dad and Mom, they looked at me like this is a fantasy. This is something that's just going to pass by. And spring was coming, and I had to organize myself. So I said, okay, very good. What happens if I start cutting lawns? So the nearest gas station was really far away, and I decided that Dad wasn't going to pay for my education, and I was going to pay for my education, but Dad could collaborate with the gas. So I would open the cars, and I would put this hose inside, and I would take out the gas, and I would go out and cut my neighbor's lawn, and at $5 a lawn, I had about 10, 12 clients a week, or every 2 weeks, and I started saving. Winter comes around, and I look at Dad, and I'm like, okay. Autumn came around, autumn. I said, okay, I've got this amount of money. I found this place that's willing to teach me. It's this a Catholic nun, and her name was Sister Lillian, and it was Thevenet Ceramics. I remember it was behind a high school, and she had this art studio within the high school, and she was independent, and she would teach me. I had to pay $40 a month and bring my own materials. So I started with her. She was an extremely generous human being, extremely generous human being. There was nothing that she did not know, that she did not tell me. She taught me everything. And she kind of adopted me as her nephew. I remember she would save her cake from dinner, and when I would come to class, she had it wrapped in a napkin, and when everybody drank coffee, she would open up the napkin. She says, you have to eat. So I would eat the cake. It was, I mean, they made some really good cake. And she began my 4 months. She was my mentor. She was the one who helped me to begin my studies. And that's basically how I started. Dad would take me, bring me back, but I actually did pay for, and I showed him that was going to be my profession. I'm entering high school now, and I decided I wanted to go to college. While in high school, I met a wonderful art teacher. Her name was Nancy de Blachette, and she taught me that anything I wanted to be, I could be. There were no obstacles in my way. I mean, the road was free, and if there were obstacles, I had everything within me to overcome that obstacle. And she helped me to begin entering contests, and we began working as a team. I mean, she would find a contest. She's like, go for this one, and then go for this one. And I ended up entering national contests, and I won quite a few of them, and got the opportunity to go to the Goddard Space Flight Center in College Park in Maryland. I'm not sure where it's at. I'm living in Uruguay now in South America, so but it is in Maryland. I think it's called the Tracking Goddard. Well, it's the NASA, and I got to receive a prize from Reader's Digest, which was given to me at the Kennedy Center. And I said to myself, remember those two big events? I'm like, wow, I got here through my art. I'm in the NASA. I'm in this contest with all these people who are competing. We weren't competing. We were within this art project that NASA had created, and it was one of our paintings was going to be selected for the catalog, which actually they chose mine, but they could have chose any one of ours. And we did an exhibit within the center, and it was a permanent exhibit for quite a while. But I said to myself, this is incredible. I mean, art opens doors, and I entered the Scholastic Art Awards, a national contest for young artists, and it really helped me to see what art education is in all of the states. I mean, all the universities were there. I chose to go to a university which was quite close to home, which was Maryland College of Art and Design, and I finished my studies and came back to Uruguay. 1987, I decided to come back to Uruguay. While in college, I worked at a frame shop on Capitol Hill, and I did this as a part-time job, and it helped to finance college. I ended up towards the end of my last year of college becoming the manager of the shop. Once I finished college, I was working 14, 16 hours a day, and one day I decided that wanted to come back to Uruguay. That was in 1987. The decision was made. The decision was first made by my parents. They were coming, and I said to myself, in this country all alone, what were my options? And one of the options was to start my career in the States. The other option was come back to Uruguay. I really don't know how I came across the decision, but I decided to come back, and a few years went by. I was with a few addictions on me, heavy addictions, and decided I needed help, and started a treatment. The treatment took a while, and I began to put order in my priorities. I started to see the world in a different way. I started to have objectives, or have my objectives a bit clearer. And I decided that I wanted to further my studies. So I went to what was fine arts here in Uruguay. At that time, it wasn't part of the university, it was part of the Ministry of Education. And I presented myself with my college degree, but my college degree was of no good because fine arts wasn't part of the university in 1987. That was a reality. So I had three options. I could either go back to the States. I could start my career again. That was another option. Or I could start my own studio. So I decided to start my own studio. I rented out a place and I started with 5 students, of which one of my students was this woman who's deaf, Alicia. And it wasn't until I met her that I realized that the people that were going to come to the studio were going to be my teachers. They were going to teach me, and I wasn't going to learn. I mean, I was not there to teach. I was there to teach art. Yes, that's a reality. But at the same time, there was so much I had to learn from each one of the 4,000 students I've had in these past 30 years. And while working with this woman, we would go forward and back, and I would see that she didn't understand very much of how I worked. One of the reasons was I talked too fast. The other reason was that I spoke a sort of Spanglish in Spanish. And when she tried to read my lips, she didn't understand me. So I'm like, okay. So I asked her, I wrote on a paper, do you have any idea of what I'm talking about? And she wrote me back. She says, up to now, I did not, in all these weeks I've been with you, I've never kept up with you. I just come because I like it here. I'm like, oh my God. Okay. So she was already drawing. I needed to teach her color. And I started looking at the studio, and in the studio I had everything, but my oil paints and my acrylics were at home. I'm like, I don't have anything to teach her color, and she has to start with color. So I opened a drawer, and I took out those 3 colors that Mr. Conroy gave me, red, yellow, and blue, and I started mixing in the palette, and it was really incredible. I started to create what I saw in this man's palette when I was in his studio. He had the palette of a master. I mean, he had it in an orderly way with all the colors, and I'm like, I started mixing the colors, and I realized that there was much more to color. And when Mr. Conroy said, you have to not use this until you understand truly what color is, once I started mixing, I understood what he tried to tell me. And that's how I started teaching here in Uruguay. And that's how I teach to this day. We only use red, yellow, blue, and white. You don't need anything but that. Those magical tubes that Mr. Conroy gave me kind of like started to talk. They were talking in such a way that it was like I didn't need to explain to her, just playing with the colors. I was telling her about the primaries, secondaries, complementaries, the color perspective, and it was like it was all working. And when I finished over that palette, I was like, wow, I like what happened, you know? And it was like then that I realized that I was part of a process. I was within what would be a creative process, and I was connecting with something that was much higher, with a much higher being, with an energy that it's that energy that flows in everything, that is very simple. And started to understand it was like concepts and theories, and I was going through a time of my life where books would show up, and we have to understand that in the early 90s there was no internet. I mean, there was no way to Google something, and life was becoming magical. And those magical tubes, which were given to me 14 years before, and me being born in front of the art studio of an artist, And I'm like, wow, wait. When I start looking back, I'm like, this is too much. And these 5 students, each one of them came to teach me something very important. So when I started to open myself up, and I started to understand the creative process, and I started to understand that there's something more to what we call art. To me, art is a way of connecting with the real creative process, which is that process that decides who is born and who dies, when it's time to blossom and when it's time to not blossom. And started connecting with students, and it was really incredible at that time how life would send me students, but at a rhythm that I could somehow tolerate. When I say the word tolerate, I'm not saying tolerate because I was intolerant. If I would have had more students, I wouldn't have had the time to learn. And that's something that when one looks back, you start saying to yourself, this is really incredible. I mean, there was a real being next to me, the true master, who walked with me and told me how to do things, taught me how to do things, gave me that space for me to decide how to do it. But that master brought to me the students which were masters hidden within students to teach me what I was supposed to teach later on. My studio is a very, very, very magical place. It's a place where things that have to happen will happen, but you will discover what the reason is later on your voyage. Sometimes it's difficult to explain how we work in the studio, but one of the questions I always ask a person when they come to the studio is I ask them, what do you see? And they look at the hand, and it's like 99.9% of the people that come to the studio, they say, I see a hand. I'm like, okay, we're going to have to change that. Now, a hand looks like something really complicated to resolve. But in reality, it's because the hand, in my mind, is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because it's something complex, it's something rational. It actually has a name. And it's composed of parts, like a square, a rectangle, a semicircle. But if we are able to abstract the hand and give it an abstract form, and it's no longer a hand, but we start seeing other forms. Let's say I see an L or a J or a V, and I look at this form here. This finger is no longer a problem because the problem is here. Now, since this is non-rational because I have no images in my mind for this form, I'm going to be obligated to draw it just as I see it. If I draw a finger, what I do is I go back to my memory, and what I do is I bring back the finger, and I'll draw the same finger I've been drawing ever since I was a kid. So one of the things that we do at the studio is teach people to see the world in an abstract way. If I see the world in an abstract way, and I see that the problem is nothing but a series of solutions, the problem is never a problem because the adventure is finding the solutions to resolve that non-problem. And that's how the hand is formed. That's basically the way I teach. I teach people to take away whatever problem they have in their head. All problems are surrounded by solutions. All problems are surrounded by solutions. If I can abstract my form of thinking and not think of things as a problem, everything is a solution. My own problem is part of the solution. That's art. I mean, art is not something complex. Art is something that flows in a world where there are no problems. Everything gets resolved. That's life. We as rational people, we put in our minds concepts that are very difficult to understand because they're rational, and we don't use emotion because the rational part makes the emotional part kind of like have a short circuit, and it's like we become people who go through crisis. And in reality, if I could just tell my rational part and say, look, let me do what I have to do, all will get done. And if it doesn't get done exactly like this, it doesn't matter. It doesn't look 100%. The important thing is that I did it. And that, my friend, is no repression. When you don't have repression within, your essence flows. That's my art studio. What we express on the canvas, in essence, is who we are. The work of art is like a magical mirror which shows you what is really going on within you. The fact that you struggle or not struggle with the work of art, within that creative process, what you're actually doing is confronting your reality. Art is a way of making a voyage inward. The result is the work of art. For me, the studio is a magical place where everything is in harmony from the moment that there is chaos. When we're in the middle of chaos, trying to find that point in harmony within a group, within oneself, within the work of art, that is basically the essence of being in the studio. At the beginning of the classes, when you start to see how people come to the class, somebody comes over really excited, there's another one who comes a bit depressed, and another one who's a bit stable. Once we begin working and each one starts on his or her individual work, when that creative process begins to move within the easels, and you see that towards the end and at the end of the class there is a total harmony. The creative process was done the way it should have been done. Nature is non-rational. Nature flows. When we work on a piece and we work in a gesturally manner, the fact that you're gesturing within a work of art and you're flowing through that piece non-stop, you're actually in the creative process. When we study nature, when we go into nature, we see that nature actually does. It doesn't detain itself to think. It just does. The creative process is something that should flow in a constant manner. Thing is, when the rational concepts come down and they decide to overtake the work of art, and the conflicts begin, that's when the artist begins to struggle. the creative process is interesting when you see it in nature. It just flows. To understand the simplicity of how it works, it takes years of training, years of actually learning to see what reality is. When you're able to see reality in an abstract form, and you're actually seeing reality as an abstraction of reality, because reality is reality. Whatever you do within your work is an abstraction of reality. That's when you're in the process. The art studio is like a family. Basically, everybody that comes into the studio um, knows a lot about my family, my life, my wife Carolina, my kids Bruno and Diego, and I basically know a lot about their family. We are family. We are family during the time we're in the studio. We are family from the moment we see each other's in different types of event outside the studio. Um, but we are family because we are brothers and sisters in this big space that we call planet. And we celebrate birthdays. We celebrate weddings. What are the difficulties I find in this process? Difficulty is letting go, is letting that student that's been here uh, training for the time that he has to trade. When we both decide that the apprenticeship has come to an end and it's time to put an end to this part of his life or her life and understand in a mature way that this is not an end but a beginning to a new stage. The person that leaves the studio, sometimes because of guilt, they stay on, and guilt has nothing to do with this. I mean, we have to be adults and we have to realize that within our process there's a beginning, a middle, and end. When you come to that end, which in reality is part of a new beginning, you're actually giving space for someone else to come and occupy your space. So if I do the process right and realize that my time is up here, but that doesn't mean it's actually up. I mean, the time at the studio is up. I mean, now it's time to go on and begin your life as an artist. Create your own Masters Palette. What has art given me? Well, first of all, a beautiful wife, uh, Carolina. She's my co-pilot. Uh, Two wonderful kids, Bruno and Diego. I think it doesn't matter what work of art I will work in within the future I've done before. There is no work of art more beautiful than either one of my two kids. I mean, they are perfection. They are my best works of art. Our best works of art, because I didn't create it on my own. I didn't create them on my own. The art world has given me the possibility to meet some extremely talented people, of which each one of those people that have come in contact with me, both students and colleagues, of which all are masters, teachers. Each one of those people has left a teaching within me that I think I would have never ever seen it with the eyes that I see it now if I wouldn't have been within the art world. The art world has opened my eyes, understanding that abstraction is not really abstraction. Abstraction is simply reality. Reality seen in a different way. When I see reality, I just see rational concepts. I see dogmas. I see ways of thinking that people have said, look, you have to think this way. But when I learn to think and see through the eyes of an artist and look through those abstractions and resolve complex problems through their solutions which are around them, I see that every person that has come in contact with me from the beginning of my life has been a crucial piece to this great puzzle I call life. Um, that's I think more than anything, art has taught me to see my life, the world, and the people that surround me in a completely different way. Concept here of the art studio is we I always use the word we because I think that we as a group are one. Um, when we talk about the Masters Palette, there's a reality in the arts in the art studio that I'm not alone. Um, when I use the term we, uh, I have somebody here next to me. Somebody might see this and say, okay, here we're next to somebody who's had too much turpentine in his life and he's a bit crazy. But I truly believe in the presence of a supreme being. I don't believe that this supreme being has a human form, but it's an energy. It's a creative energy that flows constantly. That's the true master. The way this master works in our life and its colors and its palette are the people and the situations that surround us. And when you actually think about the master's palette is that master that's next to you, that walks through life with you and opens and closes doors. He or she or it opens a door for one to go through and learn. But once one learned, that door will be shut so there can be a new beginning. I have that essence present every day that I open shop and open the studio. In my studio, one of the things that is very important is to give. When one comes to the studio, it's very important to give everything that I know, because that I'm giving wasn't mine. It was given to me. I'm just the keeper who's holding it momentarily for when that student comes, that he or she knows what to do with it. I am supposed to give it to him. That's what Mr. Conroy did with me with those magical tubes. He gave. When Sister Lillian would come with the cake in the napkin and she would give it to me, she would give. She would give symbolically something that would help me eat, just like Mr. Conroy gave me some magical tubes, which would open doors. When Nancy, my high school teacher, gave me the opportunity to see the world in a different way, she gave. When I look back in my life, every person within every piece of the puzzle, this puzzle we call life, every piece, every person that has come in contact with me has given me the opportunity to hold certain information that I don't know how, but I decide who, when, and how to give it to. But it's for that information to keep going forward. We have to understand that when we come to this world, we come bare and naked with nothing. And when we leave with nothing. If we look at our ego and we decide that what we have is ours and ours only, those things that were given die. Sometimes I think about nature. What would happen if nature had an ego and decided that, okay, I'm going to decide that there's not going to be no more oranges. It's not going to be any more people. It's not going to be any more... no, there's going to be people. If nature decides, okay, I'm not going to let it rain anymore. I'm dying. I'm taking rain with me. I'm taking apples with me. I'm taking whatever it wants to take with it. Can you imagine what would happen to this world if there would be no rain? That's the interesting thing about the Master. The Master does not have an ego and doesn't keep things to him or herself or itself. It gives and gives and gives. And that's what we do here in the studio. We give and we give and we give. That's the way I work. If I could ask one question to each and all of my students, I would like for that question to be one, and that one question for it to be all. How has the studio and art changed your life after you've come in contact with it? That would be my question. I mean, how was your life before and after?